Before Rome conquered Europe, before the Vikings terrorized the seas, before Germanic tribes toppled empires, there was another people who dominated this continent for over 800 years. They were warriors so fierce that Roman soldiers trembled at their war cries. They were innovators who gave Europe its first coins, its first paved roads outside of Rome, and technologies that wouldn't be seen again for centuries. Yet most people today couldn't tell you who the Celts really were. That's about to change. If you're fascinated by ancient history and want to discover the civilization that shaped Europe before Rome ever existed, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. We're about to uncover one of history's greatest mysteries. How did a loose collection of tribes become Europe's first true superpower? And why did they seemingly vanish from history? Drop a comment right now. What do you think you know about the Celts? Druids? Stonehenge? Braveheart? I guarantee most of what you've heard is completely wrong. Let's start by destroying the biggest myths about Celtic civilization. First myth: the Celts were primitive barbarians. Wrong. These people were master metalworkers, innovative farmers, and sophisticated traders who created the first truly European economy. Second myth: they were one unified tribe. Also wrong. The Celts were dozens of distinct peoples spread across Europe from Ireland to Turkey, from Scotland to Spain. What united them wasn't blood or politics, but culture, language, and a shared way of life that was unlike anything else in the ancient world. Third myth: they left no written records. Partially wrong. While it's true that Celtic Druids deliberately kept their knowledge oral, Celtic merchants and nobles were literate. We have Celtic inscriptions, coins, and even legal documents. The problem is that most of their history was written by their enemies, the Romans. So who were the Celts really? Imagine a civilization that emerged around 800 BC and dominated Europe for nearly a millennium. They weren't a single empire with one capital, but rather a vast network of interconnected tribes sharing similar languages, art styles, religious practices, and warrior traditions. The name Celt comes from the Greek word keltoi, meaning the hidden people. The Romans called them Galli, which is where we get Gaul. But the Celts had dozens of names for themselves: the Brigantes, the Iceni, the Helvetii, the Galatians. By their peak around 200 BC, Celtic influence stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Black Sea. We're talking about modern-day Ireland, Britain, France, Spain, Belgium, Switzerland, Austria, Czech Republic, and parts of Germany, Italy, and even Turkey. That's not a collection of barbarian tribes, that's a continental civilization. Here's what makes Celtic civilization so fascinating. They created Europe's first truly democratic societies. While other ancient civilizations were ruled by god kings and emperors, Celtic tribes were governed by assemblies where free men could vote on important decisions. Celtic women held power that wouldn't be seen again in Europe for over 1,000 years. They could own property, choose their husbands, divorce at will, and even lead armies into battle. Boudica wasn't an exception, she was part of a tradition. But let's talk about their real genius: technology and trade. The Celts were master ironworkers who created some of the finest weapons and tools of the ancient world. Celtic swords were so prized that Roman generals kept them as trophies. Their chain mail was so effective that Romans adopted the design. They invented the first metal coins north of the Alps, creating a sophisticated economy based on trade rather than just tribute. Celtic merchants traveled from the Baltic to the Mediterranean, trading amber, salt, metals, and crafted goods. Celtic engineers built the first paved roads in northern Europe, not just tracks, but engineered roads with drainage and stone foundations. They constructed massive hill forts that were essentially the first cities north of the Alps, some housing over 10,000 people. Their agricultural innovations were revolutionary. They invented the heavy plow, which allowed them to farm the dense soils of northern Europe that Mediterranean peoples couldn't cultivate. This agricultural revolution supported population densities that wouldn't be seen again until the medieval period. Celtic Druids were the intellectuals of the ancient world. They were lawyers, judges, teachers, doctors, astronomers, and priests all in one. The Druids created the first universities in Europe, not buildings, but networks of knowledge that connected tribes across thousands of miles. Celtic art was unlike anything else in the ancient world. While Greeks and Romans focused on realistic representation, Celtic artists created abstract, flowing designs that seem almost modern. These patterns influenced European art for centuries and still appear in Irish and Scottish traditions today. Now let's talk about what made the Celts legendary: their warrior culture. But this wasn't just random violence. Celtic warfare was governed by complex codes of honor and ritual that shaped European military tradition for centuries. Celtic warriors weren't just soldiers, they were the aristocracy of their society. To be a warrior was to be a nobleman, and Celtic society was built around the warriors' hall where heroes gathered to feast, tell stories, and plan raids. The most elite Celtic warriors were called Fianna in Ireland or Gisati in Gaul, professional warriors who lived for battle. These weren't part-time farmers with spears, but full-time military specialists with the best weapons, armor, and training available. Celtic weapons were works of art as much as tools of war. Their swords were masterpieces of metallurgy, often decorated with intricate patterns and inlaid with precious metals. Celtic shields weren't just protection. They were canvases that told stories of the warriors' achievements. But here's what terrified the Romans most: Celtic battle tactics. While Roman legions relied on discipline and formation fighting, Celtic warriors used psychological warfare. They would charge into battle screaming war cries, painted with blue woad, their hair spiked with lime, carrying severed heads as trophies. Some Celtic warriors fought completely naked, believing that their courage and the protection of their gods was better armor than bronze or iron. This wasn't foolish, it was calculated psychological warfare designed to break enemy morale before the real fighting began. The most feared Celtic warriors were the berserkers, warriors who worked themselves into religious frenzies before battle, believing they were possessed by animal spirits. These were the inspiration for later Viking berserkers and medieval knights. Celtic warfare wasn't just about individual courage, they were innovative tacticians. They invented the first effective cavalry charges in European warfare, using four-wheeled war chariots that could outmaneuver any infantry formation. Celtic charioteers were so skilled they could fight standing on the poles between horses while the chariot was moving at full speed. But Celtic warriors also had a code of honor that limited warfare. Battles were often settled by single combat between champions, and there were strict rules about treatment of prisoners and protection of non-combatants. This wasn't primitive savagery, this was sophisticated military culture. Celtic religion was unlike anything else in the ancient world, and it's the source of most modern misconceptions about Celtic culture. First, let's destroy the biggest myth: Stonehenge was not built by Celtic Druids. Stonehenge is thousands of years older than Celtic civilization. Real Celtic religion was a complex system that combined ancestor worship, nature spirits, and sky gods. Celtic Druids weren't just priests, they were the intellectual class of Celtic society, combining the roles of judge, teacher, doctor, astronomer, and religious leader. Becoming a Druid required 20 years of training, memorizing vast amounts of law, history, astronomy, medicine, and poetry. Druids were the living libraries of Celtic culture, and they deliberately kept their knowledge oral to prevent it from being stolen or corrupted. Celtic religious practices were centered around sacred groves, springs, and hilltops rather than temples. They believed that certain places were thin spots between the world of humans and the world of spirits. Many of these sacred sites are still considered special today. They became the locations of medieval churches and modern pilgrimage sites. Human sacrifice did occur in Celtic religion, but not in the way Romans described it. Archaeological evidence suggests that sacrifice was rare in ritual, often involving criminals or volunteers who believed they were ensuring their tribe's prosperity. The Romans exaggerated Celtic sacrifice to justify their conquest. It's classic propaganda. Celtic mythology was incredibly rich and complex. They had creation stories, hero cycles, and supernatural adventures that were passed down orally for centuries. Many of these stories were later written down by Irish and Welsh monks, giving us the Mabinogion, the Ulster cycle, and the Arthurian legends. Celtic gods weren't distant Olympic deities, they were active participants in human affairs. Celtic mythology is full of gods who fall in love with mortals, interfere in battles, and demand personal relationships with their worshippers. The most important Celtic festival was Samhain, the ancestor of modern Halloween, when the barrier between the world of the living and the dead was believed to be thinnest. This wasn't about horror or evil, it was about maintaining connection with ancestors and honoring those who came before. So how did this continental civilization disappear? The answer is more complex than just the Romans conquered them. Celtic decline began not with Roman invasion, but with internal changes. As Celtic societies became more centralized and urban, they began to lose the flexibility and mobility that made them powerful. Celtic hill forts became targets rather than refuges. The Romans didn't conquer the Celts through superior military might alone, they conquered them through superior organization and political warfare. Rome was a state. The Celts were a civilization, but not a unified political entity. Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul wasn't just military, it was a masterpiece of divide and conquer politics. Caesar allied with some Celtic tribes to fight others, gradually destroying Celtic unity. The famous Battle of Alesia in 52 BC wasn't just a military defeat, it was the end of independent Celtic political power on the continent. But here's the crucial point. Roman conquest didn't mean Celtic extinction. In most areas, Romans ruled through Celtic elites who adopted Roman customs while maintaining Celtic identity. Celtic languages, art, and traditions survived under Roman rule. The real end of Celtic civilization came with the collapse of the Roman Empire and the arrival of Germanic peoples Angles, Saxons, Franks, and others who displaced Celtic populations rather than ruling over them. In Britain, Celtic peoples retreated to Wales, Scotland, and Cornwall. In Gaul, they were gradually absorbed by Frankish culture. Ireland remained unconquered by Rome, preserving Celtic culture in its purest form. Irish monks later became the preservers of not just Celtic tradition, but of classical learning during the Dark Ages. Without Irish monasteries, we might have lost much of ancient literature entirely. The Celts didn't vanish, they transformed. Their influence on modern Europe is everywhere if you know how to look for it. Celtic languages survive today in Irish, Welsh, Scottish Gaelic, Breton, and Cornish. These aren't just curiosities, they're living links to ancient European civilization. Irish Gaelic and Welsh have more native speakers today than many other European languages. Celtic place names are across Europe. London comes from the Celtic Londinium. Paris comes from the Celtic tribe called the Parisii. Vienna comes from the Celtic Vidunia. The rivers Rhine, Thames, and Shannon all have Celtic names. You can't travel through Europe without encountering Celtic linguistic heritage. Celtic art never died. The intricate interlacing patterns you see in medieval illuminated manuscripts, Irish crosses, and even modern Celtic jewelry all derive from ancient Celtic artistic traditions. Celtic art influenced the development of medieval European art and continues to inspire modern designers. Celtic mythology shaped European literature. King Arthur, the Holy Grail, the Round Table. These are all Celtic stories that were adopted and adapted by medieval writers. Modern fantasy literature, from Tolkien to contemporary authors, draws heavily on Celtic mythological themes. Celtic legal traditions influenced the development of common law. The idea that law comes from community consensus rather than royal decree, that's a Celtic concept that survived in places like Ireland and influenced English legal development. Even Celtic religious ideas survived. Many Catholic saints are Christianized versions of Celtic deities. Celtic festivals became Christian holidays. Christmas incorporates Celtic winter solstice traditions, Easter includes Celtic spring rituals, and Halloween is directly descended from Samhain. Modern European democratic traditions have Celtic roots. The idea that free men should have a voice in governance, that women can hold property and make their own decisions, that law should protect individuals from arbitrary authority. These are all Celtic contributions to European civilization. The Celts were Europe's first civilization in the truest sense, not just a collection of tribes, but a shared culture that spanned a continent. They created the first European identity that wasn't based on conquest or empire, but on shared values, language, and tradition. Understanding the Celts helps us understand modern Europe. The tension between local identity and continental unity, the importance of cultural rather than political bonds, the integration of warrior values with sophisticated legal and social systems, these are all Celtic contributions to European civilization. The Celts were Europe's first civilization in the truest sense, not just a collection of tribes, but a shared culture that spanned a continent. They created the first European identity that wasn't based on conquest or empire, but on shared values, language, and tradition. Understanding the Celts helps us understand modern Europe. The tension between local identity and continental unity, the importance of cultural rather than political bonds, the integration of warrior values with sophisticated legal and social systems, these are all Celtic contributions to European civilization. What fascinates you most about Celtic culture? Their warrior traditions? Their innovative technology? Their influence on modern Europe? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I love discussing ancient history with fellow enthusiasts. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Europe's forgotten first civilization, you'll love our other videos on ancient peoples who shaped the modern world. Check out our playlist on ancient civilizations, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more historical mysteries uncovered. Next week, we're exploring the Sea Peoples, the mysterious raiders who brought down the Bronze Age and changed the course of human history. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.